In March of this year, when the government was heading towards a shutdown, Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, broke with the party and backed a Republican bill to avoid it. He said at the time that he did so because Democrats need to be the adults in the room. There have been many reports that top-line Democrats are saying this bill is going to lead a path to win back voters in the midterms. The bill is bad, but look, the end justifies the means. As a reporter who worked in Washington and who continues to write and report on the Democratic Party, how are potential Democratic voters in this moment, when the news feels like an onslaught every day, how are they supposed to make sense of it? Like, where are they supposed to find, and to whom should they turn to find the message of the Democratic Party?
Ideally, it would be Democrats and Democratic affiliated voices and Democratic affiliated media groups and whatnot. But I think one of the challenges Democrats have right now is that there really actually isn't. There's no way for them to get their message directly to the voters, right? Like, it's Democrats themselves rely on the traditional press, which is, I think, not wise to do to get their message out. They rely on traditional methods of distribution. And what it means in practice in a world where kind of media is very fragmented, where people are getting their information and news from all kinds of sources, few of them top down and centralized, and in a world where they have to contend with it for attention from other, from their political opponents, from other people in the society. What it means is that none of this is actually getting down to the voters. Democrats can actively work to strip out the worst parts, the worst amendments in this bill, which they did in the Senate. Does anyone outside of Washington journalist circles hear about it? Not really.
If you were Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries, in this moment, what are they to do?
I mean, my advice would be for the lawmakers, would be to do as much as possible to get attention in as non-traditional ways as that might require. When Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland went down to El Salvador to see whether he could meet with Kilmar Brego Garcia, the man who was mistakenly renditioned to a prison down there, that was the kind of attention-grabbing act that really did get a message across. And in my view, Schumer, Jeffries, Democratic leadership has not only been just unwilling to do that kind of attention-grabbing action, but seem to just not have any faith in their ability to seize control of a narrative, to set the terms of a conversation, to persuade, to act as sort of like a dominant force. They seem just very reactive. And this approach to the bill, we're just going to wait. We're going to wait for this bill to do our work for us. It's very reactive. And I firmly believe that, in politics, if you're just waiting for things to benefit you, you're ultimately not going to win. You're going to lose.
Well, the Democrat getting the most attention in this moment is, of course, Zohran Mamdani, the 33-year-old running for mayor in New York City. His campaign, I mean, like you, he has gotten very good at social media. From his campaign, do you think the Democrats are learning the right lessons? Because even at this moment, Schumer and Jeffries have not backed Mamdani.
I don't know if Democrats are going to learn the right lessons. And I think part of that is because they see those lessons as entangled up in Mamdani's politics. They're like, well, this guy, he says he's a democratic socialist, he's on the left, and not only can is there nothing to learn from that, but that's actively hostile to what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to win these centrist districts. I would say in response to that you can actually kind of separate at least somewhat the substantive agenda from the political approach. And the political approach of first kind of constantly being out there and constantly being open and not really trying to manage your interactions with the public for the sake of creating kind of organic moments with the public is very effective. The constant and relentless focus on people's lived and ordinary needs is important. But also, you'll note that Mamdani does not do that by sacrificing one group or another. His sort of whole approach to, meeting people where they are is more additive than subtractive.
Our democracy has been attacked from within. For too long, New Yorkers have strained to find a leader who represents us, who puts us first. And we have been betrayed time and again. And when we no longer believe in our democracy, it only becomes easier for people like Donald Trump to convince us of his worth, for billionaires to convince us that they must always lead. As FDR said, democracy has disappeared in several other great nations, not because the people disliked democracy, but because they had grown tired of unemployment and insecurity, of seeing their children hungry while they sat helpless in the face of government confusion and weakness. In desperation, they chose to sacrifice liberty in the hope of getting something to eat. New York, if we have made one thing clear over these past months, it is that we need not choose between the two. We can be free and we can be fed. We can demand what we deserve. And I pledge to you that we will remake this great city, not in my image, but in the image of every New Yorker who has only known struggle. In our New York, the power belongs to the people.
There's a lot to draw from that as well for Democrats. I think if you are a centrist Democrat, you can look at the Mamdani campaign and see lots of things you can adopt for yourself, tailored to your own particular circumstances and voters. And I'm not sure that, the Schumers and the Jeffries and the various Democratic leadership figures can quite see that.
Speaking of groups, the New York Times published a report that Mamdani, when he was a high school senior, in his application to Columbia, when asked to identify his race, checked Asian, but also Black or African American. Now, the New York Times ran this story based on an anonymous source. It had not amended that piece. It has not offered any kind of retraction. Did the Times run this piece because many of its readers, elite, white, college-educated, are still hyper-fixated with race-conscious college admissions, even after affirmative action has been effectively ended?
I can't really speculate on why the Times ran the piece. I will say, I think I can say that it is certainly true that there is a non-trivial portion of the readership that is basically obsessed with the idea of race-conscious college admissions. For whatever reason, it's catnip to them. They love to read about it. And I think that for those people, this is a story that seems to confirm their worst ideas of how college admissions work. Even though Mamdani wasn't admitted into Columbia. That's what's been kind of funny to me about this whole story. It's sort of, look at this.
It didn't even work.
It didn't work, right? If that was the intent, it didn't work. I think there's evidence to suggest that wasn't the intent, that it was a good faith effort to kind of make sense of his identity on a form that isn't really conducive to that.
But it's funny though, because you're saying there's a set of readers at the New York Times that are obsessed with this subject.
This is just my speculation.
Yes, and it's a speculation based and born out of facts, but sure. They would say that the Democratic Party has an obsession with wokeness, with identity politics, with gender. As the Democratic Party begins to rebuild itself or remake itself, or however it wants to keep going, where have you landed on how the party should talk about language and wokeness and all those things that people claim the Democrats are obsessed with?
My one of my views here is that I think that the claim that the Democratic Party, like the actual institutional Democratic Party and the people elected to serve in positions as Democrats that claim that they're obsessed with language and quote unquote wokeness, I find actually not very persuasive on just like a factual level. It's like I'm always asking, like, point me to the Democrats, the actual Democratic politicians who are going around talking about toxic masculinity or intersectionality or using Latinx. Like, show them to me. I tend to think that when people are complaining about the Democrats, they're as much referring to, you know, things happening in the culture that aren't really related to the party itself, but are considered to be part of the same maybe cultural formation. And
What do you mean by that?
so, like, if you're scrolling on TikTok and you see someone who's like openly liberal going on about, I'll just use toxic masculinity as another example here, toxic masculinity, I think there are a lot of people who are going to associate that with the Democratic Party, even if that person is not a Democrat and has no formal association with the Democratic Party, right? Like, there's no connection there, but they're going to associate it with the Democratic Party. And kind of bolstering that is that there is this whole right-wing media ecosystem that explicitly works to do this, explicitly works to find examples of people who might be on the cultural extremes, on the cultural left, and then elevate them as emblematic of the entire Democratic Party. My sort of sense here is that first and foremost, the thing to do is like to focus on, you know, material things, concrete things for people, like programs to help people, people's actual concerns, like go to people, find out what their concerns are and focus on those. As I kind of alluded to earlier, part of this is going to have to be building some sort of media ecosystem to like get the message to the people who need to hear it, to push back against kind of the actual, you know, right-wing media ecosystem. It does a very good job of caricaturing what the Democrats do, who the Democrats are, so on and so forth.
You've been reaching young people by creating these TikToks. And you recently told the Colby Echo that students now, the difference between students now versus when you were in college is that students now are, quote, more thoughtful, more open-minded, and more open to difference. When people talk about Gen Z and Gen Alpha, that's not usually the description we find. These are people Democrats are going to have to win either back or over.
I'll just say in my experience, I do spend a bunch of time around college students, either teaching or, you know, lecturing or what have you. And in my experience, like the college students I have spent time around have been smart and interesting and generous and broad-minded, and first and foremost sort of like, you know, wanting to understand more about the world. If there's anything that really distinguishes these younger voters from maybe, you know, I'm in my 30s, right, from older millennials, it's that there's a real hunger for authenticity in politicians, for a sense that they're not being pandered to, for a sense that the people who they're voting for actually believe something. I think, you know, Mamdani did extremely well with young men. Part of, you know, there's been the conversation about how Democrats win back young men. And I really think that like his success is just that he seems genuine. And that's something for, if for Democrats trying to win young people back, you know, genuineness, earnestness, you know, a sense that that you're a real person who is trying to do good and not just trying to like move up the ladder, goes a long way.
Which critiques of the Democratic Party do you think will be woven into its renewal?
That's an interesting question. I think that, so to my mind, the critiques that make the most sense, right, are that the Democratic Party is entirely too committed to a policy agenda that tinkers around the edges and is still a bit too afraid of embracing kind of broad, simple, but effective kind of slogans, gesturing towards policies that are easy to understand to people. One thing I think is of note about the Mamdani campaign is that whatever you think of the policies, you know, free buses, rent control, city-owned groceries, those are simple and easy to understand. You can say them. You don't need to do a bunch of explanation, and that simplicity and clarity, I think, is a real asset when you're campaigning. And I think that the Democratic Party, broadly speaking, needs to be looking for ideas and policies that fit into that. No more tax credits for, if you are X, Y, and Z, you get a tax credit. No more of that. Much more clear. I think that what Democratic voters are looking for, and this shows up in the polling, is less ideological and more attitudinal. They want people who are going to visibly fight and be aggressive and stand up for them, and treat their opponents as people to be beaten and not as like wayward friends. I think there's a lot of frustration with the way the Democratic leaders are constantly talking about bipartisanship and looking for ways to say, we got to work with our Republican friends and allies. And I think Democratic voters want to hear Democratic politicians say, no, we think that the Republicans are wrong and we want to beat them. I think honestly, of everything, I think that's the thing that's going to mark the next sort of generation of Democratic politicians. And you already kind of see it, right? You already kind of see it with AOC, with Pete Buttigieg, even, who, for all of his, he has a very like calm demeanor, is very forthright about being an opponent of the Republicans and not someone trying to pull them back to some kind of bipartisan, fantasy.
You want the Democrats to join the WWE.
I want the Democrats to behave like an opposition party. I want them to behave like not junior partners in government, but an opposition party that recognizes that their job in this moment is not to look for ways to help the Republicans govern, but their job is to look for ways to remove the Republicans from power.
Do you think, as some of your colleagues at the Times have suggested, that the Mamdani win in the primary signals the beginning of the end of the old Democratic Party guard?
I don't know if I feel confident saying it necessarily means the end of the old guard, but I think what it does mean is that younger Democrats, more progressive Democrats, people with like disagreements with the old guard are not going to wait their turns. They're going to try to seize power and authority for themselves. If that means running in an open primary, they're going to do that. If it means primarying, existing incumbents, they're going to do that. But I think that what the 2024 election, I think, demonstrated for a lot of younger people and younger Democrats, and not even some Democrats who aren't younger, but just who are a bit outside of the leadership, is that the people in charge just aren't fit for the moment. They're not fit for the kind of political combat that might be necessary, and so if they won't leave, then they'll have to be forced out.
And for better or worse, we are in a reality television moment.
I don't see the reality TV era of politics as all that much different from how politics used to be in this country. It's interesting to read about, say, 19th century American politics, which is rambunctious and chaotic and violent in a way that would shock the sensibilities of everyone in politics today. Like the kind of more...
You think there's not enough beefing?
I mean, I do think there's not enough beefing. I think they kind of like stayed, and the gentlemanly politics of that, like a Biden grew up with, right, in Congress of the last half century, is like a bit of an aberration, and that in reality, American politics is generally quite chaotic and rambunctious and divisive and polarized. And so I kind of see that this moment as being kind of a return, obviously with new kinds of technologies, with new kinds of political forces, but like a return to the ways that politics were in the past. And I'm not sure that's something to be afraid of. I think it's something to embrace the fact that democratic mass politics, which are ultimately about speaking in the public and to the public, are going to demand more performance than simply going on a Sunday show and giving some talking points.
Like, I'm thinking about all the people listening to this right now and they're going, Jamelle, I'm so tired of fighting. Like the idea of, hey, we need to enter an era of more fighting is really daunting and taxing and almost unfathomable. Maybe the distinction, we need to fight less. Like we, the voters, the concerned citizens, need to fight less. And the people we have hired and employed and elected to represent us need to fight more. I think we have done enough fighting. I think it is their time to actually represent the constituents and their aggression that got them elected in the first place.
I think there's some of that. I think that there needs to be more kind of like performance on part of elected officials, but I would take this a different path. I think that what ordinary people need to do is less following politics like it's a sport and like it's entertainment and like it's, that kind of thing. So I think there needs to be less what political scientists call political hobbyism and more active engagement in actual politics.
Which is what you're doing in Charlottesville.
Which is some of what I do in Charlottesville, right? But it means sort of getting actively engaged in your local community, in civic associations. It means during campaign time, if you have the will and wherewithal, volunteer to be a poll worker. It means, if you want to see someone elected in your district for whatever office it is, like maybe try to gather people together to talk about it. But like actually in real life, engagement in political life, more of that, which I think does a great job of connecting people to outcomes, and less kind of treating politics as a hobby, treating politics as mainly a thing to consume.